Hello, this is Dr. Smallwood, and I just wanted to thank you all for inviting me to be the keynote speaker at the Association for Applied Sports Psychology National Conference. I will be speaking on spectator violence and violence in sports. So the purpose of this presentation is to help shed some light on the influential nature of violent behavior that athletes can have on society, and I'm going to demonstrate a correlation between violence in professional sports and violence exhibited by the spectators of sports. And so I'm going to be looking at whether or not there's a way to reverse this process to create a safer environment. And I'm going to suggest the use of stadiums as a social laboratory to help against the issue of the decrease in morals and values, also known as anomie in society. So I'm going to be defining some terms. Dr. Daniel Nguyen from Murray State University defines a sport fan as an individual who is interested in and follows a sport, athlete, or team, and a sports spectator as an individual who at that moment is watching or listening to a sporting event. And anomie, which is a term developed by a French sociologist named Emily Durkheim. She uses this as a way to describe the idea of the lack of norms and values that should be part of modern society. And so, what is aggression? Aggression is considered a behavior, and it is usually defined as the intention of a person to inflict pain or harm on another person. However, it is not considered aggression if the person thinks, feels, or expresses the desire to harm someone. So there's four characteristics of aggression, and the first is that it's a behavior, not a feeling. The second is that it's intentional and does not happen accidentally. The third is harm or injury has to occur, and it doesn't have to necessarily be physical. Sometimes it can be used as a way to intimidate or embarrass or even deprive another person of something, and that can be considered aggression as well. And the fourth is that it has to be directed towards a living being. So that means kicking a chair doesn't count as aggression. And so there's two main types of aggression. The first is instrumental aggression, and the second is hostile or reactive aggression. And so instrumental aggression is when aggression is used to help, like it has more purpose to it than just harming or injuring someone. It happens when the person uses aggression in like a more acceptable way that is part in succeeding in the sport. And so an example of this would be if a football player tackles his opponent to win the ball back for his team. So the ultimate goal isn't to harm the player, it's to help his team advance further. While the other type of aggression, hostile or also known as reactive aggression, is used when an athlete has the purpose in mind to harm or injure the other player. And so an example of that would be if the football player were tackling another player who doesn't even have the ball just to injure him and get him out of the game. And so this doesn't happen accidentally, though, and so it's a deliberate act and should have consequences. And so I'll be looking at the social learning theory to help show the correlation between violence in sports and violence shown by spectators. And so, according to Albert Bandura, aggressive behaviors are learned in two different ways, modeling and vicarious. And so, in the modeling effect, this happens when a person imitates the behavior of someone they are observing. So if they see someone demonstrate an aggressive behavior, then they're more willing to exhibit that same behavior themselves. And in the vicarious process, that happens when those who are observing models or like the athletes being rewarded for their aggressive behavior as opposed to being punished for it. And so this is a lot more concerning when considering the younger spectators that are watching the sports with their parents. And so in the long run, this can affect future generations, and then just how people, their perspectives and outlooks on violence changes over time. And so these are, so Thyrer, I think that's how you say his name. These are some common reasons that he gave for why spectator violence occurs. And so the first is the crowd's desire to intimidate the opposing team or officials. And the second is just the availability of alcohol during the game, or just even how late the game starts can influence spectator violence, or the rallies that can be offensive, and warm weather and cheap seats, and simply just the violent behaviors by the athletes themselves can influence the spectators. And so Zillman and Paulus, I think that's how you say their names as well, they showed a connection between the spectators and the athletes, and vice versa. And so athletes, they showed, enjoy getting the crowd excited, and the violent behavior is sometimes used to help get the crowd riled up, because the crowd enjoys seeing the aggressive behavior and the violence, and so spectators enjoy watching this, and so the athletes, wanting to please the spectators, will sometimes be more aggressive in their play because of that. And so some possible solutions that I see for helping curb this aggression in sports, and that's just a positive influence, because the social impact that the athletes have on people is quite large, and so this behavior is sometimes mimicked in society, and so even though a large part of it is negative, it can be used for the positive as well. And so if sports and athletes exhibit more positive behavior and sportsmanship, then society will see that, and will gradually begin to change to be more like that, to be more like the people they look up to. And so if sport organizations took more time in realizing the potential of influencing society through their athletes and their good behavior, then they should be able to help, at least in the process of creating a safer environment. And so even though there's a lot of factors involved in instigating spectator violence and violence in sports, many of these can be fixed through regulations or different perspectives, and even a healthier way of expressing the emotion. And so we should learn not to see the rivals, like our sport rivals, as enemies, or even physical threats, but simply as other people who enjoy the same sport. And this change in our perspective should especially be true as Christians, since the way we portray ourselves in society influence our witness to others. And so, and this even includes our rivals on the field. And so, as a Christian worldview, I would say as followers of Christ, we are called to be witnesses and representatives of Christ. And so some verses I found that connect with the topic that we're speaking on would be Psalm 11:5, which talks about how the Lord tests the righteous, but his soul hates the wicked and the one who loves violence. And Proverbs 3:31, which says how we shouldn't envy a man we shouldn't envy a man of violence and not choose any of his ways. And so even though these are just a few examples, they still show how, violence isn't a form or a way that people as Christians should pursue. And so we should also learn how to live in such a way that people see the fruit that we bear, and that it is good fruit, which comes from Matthew 7:15 through 20, and also just the golden rule about learning to treat others in such a way that we wish to be treated, and we should learn how to love our enemies, and that's found in Matthew 5:43 through 48. But I believe the best answer to violence in sports and spectator violence from a Christian worldview comes from Paul in Ephesians 4:1 through 6, where he says, I therefore, a prisoner for the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience and bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. And so that concludes my presentation on spectator violence and violence in sports. And I hope you all enjoyed my presentation. So yeah, and this is my works cited page. And yes, thank you.